Okay, Tov. We're on Daf Nun Amid Beis, and we're up to Gufa, which is approximately, I would say, about 15 lines down from the top of the The Gemara is going to bring a brisa as we go along to record a list of time periods in which, if a person does malacha during those time slots, he's not going to see a siman bracha. And we've already mentioned with regard to mina mincha lamala, meaning on Erev Yontif, whatever Yontif it would be, and even on Erev Shabbos, we said that that's not the time to be involved in malacha, but rather one should use his free time. He should dedicate free time on Erev Yontif, mina mincha lamayla, and also on Erev Shabbos, and that's going to be Eino Roa Simon Brach. Gufa. Let's go back to the Brisa. Ha'oseh malacha bi'arvei Shabbosos u'bi'arvei Yom Tovim min ha'mincha lamala. And this is going to end with Eino Roa Simon Bracha Liolam, but we have another few cases that are mentioned here in this Brisa of Eino Roa Simon Bracha Liolam. Now he's got a case where he does malacha on Motzei Shabbos. Now, we have to ask ourselves, what is the problem with malacha Motzei Shabbos? And if we're talking about a case of Tosefes Shabbos, we have a halacha of tzarich lahosif min hachol ala kodesh. And if there's a din of Tosefes Shabbos, that's not an Isur Malacha of a secondary nature, that we would call Roas Simon Bracha. I mean, what does Rashi mean? Rashi says, "B'motzoi Shabbos mishum kvod Shabbos shemosifim michol ala kodesh." If he's talking about a case of someone who was mosif minachol ala kodesh, and then he went ahead and he did malacha, I mean, you'd have to say that that's much more serious of a violation than just Eino Roa Simon Bracha. The Brisker Rav has his own take on this Rashi. Rashi is not referring to the din of Tosefet Shabbos. The Isur Malacha during Tosefet Shabbos cannot be compared to all this on the list of Eino Roa Simon Bracha. And not only that, he claims that Tosefet Shabbos per se is not what you'd call covet Shabbos. He extended Shabbos and he's chayav to withdraw from malacha. But rather, Rashi's talking about a case where it's already chol, and he's already recited Havdalah, but he hasn't recited Havdalah ala kos. And therefore, technically, he's allowed to do malacha, but he should be machabed the Shabbos after Shabbos by immediately involving himself in Havdalah ala kos without delay. And just like there's a covered Shabbos on Erev Shabbos to dedicate oneself to the mitzvah of Hachana Shabbos, so too there's a covered Shabbos after Shabbos to recite Havdalah, and rather than delay and dilly-dally with malacha, he should take the first opportunity that he has to recite Havdalah. So if he gets involved in malacha, heavy malacha, I don't mean turning on a light, and he's distracted from Havdalah, so by postponing Havdalah, he is, in a sense, undermining the opportunity to be machabed the Shabbos with Havdalah. And that reflects the Rambam Shita that when it says in the Torah, Zochres Yom Shabbos L'Kadsho, it means B'knisaso ubi yitziaso, B'knisaso b'kiddush, ubi yitziaso b'avdol. And the Rambam goes ahead, after quoting the pasuk in the Torah, in the Aseret Dibros, he then quotes a pasuk in Yeshayahu Hanavi of Lichvod Hashem b'mechubad, that is a mitzvah to be mechaber the Shabbos. So on a Doraisa level, we have a mitzvah of Zachar, and the mitzvah of Zachar is defined midrabanan as covered Shabbos. And Rambam says that the covered Shabbos that you give is both b'knisaso and b'yitziaso. Now, Tosfos Dibra Maskala Ose quotes a Yushalmi that it seems that the women folk had a minhag to abstain from malacha on Motzi Shabbos. If I understand correctly, what he means is the entire night after Shabbos. And the rejects such a minhag, and he says that there's no basis for it at all. But yet, even though it's not a minhag, we don't have to necessarily be mevatel minhag, the minhag. We can allow the minhag to go on, but if we want to be mevatel the minhag, we can do so. We have that option. So it's one thing, says Tosfos, to wait with malacha until after you finish all the tefillos, possibly, as the Brisker Rav wants to say, even after Havdalah. That certainly is a valid minhag, and you cannot be mevatel that minhag. You can't undermine that minhag wherever that minhag was accepted. But you do have license to be mevatel a minhag that has no basis whatsoever. I mean, the Torah says that for the, for Yom HaShvi, for the period of the 24 hours plus, we abstain from malacha, but to add another day or another night, that's not a valid minhag. Then he has ubemotzoi Shabbos, ubemotzoi Yontif, motzoi Yom Kippurim. Now, I would assume that motzoi Yontif has the same status as motzoi Shabbos, that he should wait and postpone his malach until he finishes whatever he has to finish, whether it's Tfilas Arvis, whether it's Havdalah Alakos, whatever it might be. But then it says motzoi Yom Kippurim. And that's a bit strange, because Yom Kippur fits into one or two categories. It's either Shabbos or it's Yontif. But why does the Brisa set up a third special category for Yom Kippur? So the Achronim, he quotes a sefer called the Ne'um Yehuda, I'm not familiar, say the following, that Yontif is only an Isur Lav with regard to Malacha. Yom Kippur is an Isur Kares. And therefore, if we had the Brisa of Yontif, we would certainly derive Yom Kippurim in a Kal V'chomer. So that even if Yom Kippur should be classified as a Yontif, it's certainly more Chomer than a regular Yontif. So there doesn't seem to be any need to mention Yom Kippurim. And he quotes a Rosh. The Rosh has a different girsa in our Gemara, and he omits the words of the Motzah Yom Kippurim. But in order to give some explanation to our girsa as we have it, he says the following, that with regard to Yom Kippur, we have an additional element here, which would lead us to a Havamina that Yom Kippur is the exception to the rule. And what is the Havamina to take Yom Kippur out of the rule? He says And most of this I understand. I don't understand all of it, but we'll see. Maybe we could work it out. He says that with regard to Shabbos and Yontiv, we should abstain from malacha until we finish the Seder, Tfilas, Hayom, whatever that is. Let's say Ma'ariv, or whether it's Havdalah. And after that, you want to continue in Isa Malacha. That's not within the purview of this minhag. And he says the following: if, let's say, the tzibur will be davening, let's throw out a number, at 7 p.m., but I daven at 6:50 p.m. So before the tefillah of the tzibur completed, I completed my tefillas yachid. And he says that's not enough to allow you to do malach. When it says b'motzai Shabbos yom tovim, it means until the entire tzibur has completed its davening. The yachid, therefore, is kafuf to the tzibur. Now on Yom Kippur, it's a little bit more complicated. Why? Because he says that there are certain batei knesios that decide that ne'ilah, I'm going to use a kind of a pejorative term, but don't take me wrong, shlepta. They decide that ne'ilah comes once a year, let's extend it. Umarichem betfilas ne'ilah afil liachar tzeis hakochav. The yesh batei knesios and other batei knesios, the more yekish batei knesios, they go by the clock, and as soon as we're up to tzeis hakochavim, we daven ma'ariv and we end the fast. So those batei knesios have completed their tefillas arvis, let's say at 6:50, and there's another base knesses, they're extending it another 10 minutes or whatever it might be. He says the following: that in this context, the Brisa is establishing a fundamental difference between two dimensions of Yom Kippur. With regard to one, he's kafuf. With regard to the other, he's a free agent. He's not bound by the minhag. How so? He says, with regard to Achila and Shasiya, he's allowed to do malacha, even though the tzibur in certain batei knesios are continuing and extending their davening. However, with regard to malacha, asur lasos malacha ad sheyisaimu kol batei knesios es tfilas arbis. So again, I'm just presenting you what I have here in the Ne'um Yehuda. I'm not familiar with the Sefer, but I want to leave you with two questions that really baffled my mind. First of all, if there are batei knesios in the city that decide to extend Yom Kippurim and postpone Ma'ariv, okay, tov aleim bracha, but that doesn't mean that I and my base knesses has to be kafuf to them. Why is he so convinced that with regard to Isa Malacha, this Bryce is telling us that we have to wait for all the batei knesios? And the second question that I have is that what's the difference between Yom Kippur vis-a-vis Achila and Shasiya and Yom Kippur vis-a-vis Malacha? That same identical sanctity, Kedushas Hayom, that engenders an Isa Malacha, engenders an Isa Achila v'Shasiya, and vice versa. So Mimanavshach, if I'm not kafuf because they want to extend Yom Kippurim, that doesn't obligate me, then I should be able to not only eat and drink, I should be able to do malacha as well. And if on the other hand, as far as malacha is concerned, they can be mechayev me to extend Yom Kippurim until kol batei knesios be'ir, all the synagogues in the city have completed Ma'ariv, then why not apply that to Achil and Shasiya? Is he talking about pikuach nefesh? Is he talking about The fact that we fasted for 24 and a half hours or whatever the number is, and therefore we have to find a heter to allow people to eat. He doesn't say a word. But what we do get out of this is that the Achronim here are working very hard to understand the Girs as we have it, that after you mention Shabbosos, Motzi Shabbos, and Motzi Yom Yontif, therefore, what compels you to add Motzi Yom Kippur? Why would we need that as a separate part of the Brisa? And here we find a distinction in a case where different Bate Knesios have different customs as to when to end Yom Kippur. We find a distinction between Achil and Shasi on the one hand, let's call it the overwhelming need to allow as soon as we can Achil and Shasi, as opposed to Malacha, where it's not so terrible if we ask him to delay his Malacha. But obviously, it's very raw. Now, I do want to say that in the Hare Kedem on Masechet Shabbos, there's an entire piece in the name of the Rav about Kabbalas HaShabbos and Seis HaShabbos of the Tzibur. And you and I think that Kabbalas HaShabbos is my personal acceptance. If I want to start at X, we all have to start with Shkia, but the earlier than that, it's my own personal, it's in my discretion. But the Rav proves from a few different sugyas about the Tkiyos and so forth and so on that there's such a concept called Kabbalas HaTzibur. And the Yachid is kafuf to the Tzibur, both entering into Shabbos and ending Shabbos. How that impacts on Yom Kippur, I don't know. I don't think the Rav in that piece, I have it actually, I see it here on my, one of the few farm I actually could find. So maybe I'll get a chance to flip through it a little bit later. But I don't think he discusses Yom Kippur. Now, the next piece of Gemara sounds like Agadah, but it's not really Agadah. It has a principle that the Gemara is going to formulate that's more in the world of Hashkafa, and that has to do with Shalol Lishma and Lishma. But it still belongs to the realm of Halacha, and it's an extension of our discussion about doing Malacha during these periods of time. Tana Rabbanan. Now the Brisa opens with sort of generic statements, and then it continues to define each one. Yesh Zoriz v'niskar, Yesh Zoriz v'nifsad, Yesh Shafal v'niskar, Yesh Shafal v'nifsad. Now what we're discussing here is the Iser, or I shouldn't say the Iser because that's a very heavy term, but the minhag of abstaining from Malacha in order to prepare for Shabbos. And the Brisa is going to divide it up into different types of people. There are those people who would normally do Malacha, and they're very busy during the entire week, and comes Erev Shabbos, they dedicate their time, they abstain from Malacha for Hachana l'Shabbos. There are those who are not really doing Malacha during the week anyway. Will they get any reward for being idle on Erev Shabbos? Says coincidentally, they fulfilled this minhag, but not with kavanah. We're not l'shma. And I just want to point out, because I got confused here, that the word shafal does not mean at least what I thought it meant, and it's a musadika term, about humility. The word shafal equals idle, someone who doesn't involve himself in malach. So let's go through the four cases. Zoriz v'nizkar, the Ovid kula Shabbos, so he's busy with malacha the entire week. Below Ovid b'malei Shabbos, becomes Erev Shabbos, min mincha l'mayla, and all of a sudden he closes shop and he says, time to prepare the house, prepare go to mikvah, clean ourselves and rechitza and so forth and so on. So that this person is called a zariz v'niskar. Niskar means he gets full schar for deliberate cessation of malacha on Erev Shabbos after Samuch Lemincha. Now we get to the second category, Zariz v'nifsad. Here's a person, the Ovid Kuli Shabsa, he's busy with his work the entire Shavua, the whole week, the Ovid V'Vali Shabsa, and he refuses to terminate his work on Erev Shabbos. He continues into that period of time in a Mincha Lamala, and he does Malach. All this is a violation of the minhag to abstain from Malacha on Erev Shabbos, and therefore, since he continues his malacha, he is a nifsad. And nifsad here means that eno roes simon bracha, so he's exerting himself, and it's an exercise in futility. And the Mefarshim say that even if he makes a little extra buck because he pushes himself to work to the last minute before Shabbos, he's going to lose money from some other place, and it's all going to balance itself out. That's called a zariz v'nifsad. Now we get to the second pair of categories. We have shafal v'niskar, delo avid kuli shabsa. He's idle the whole week long, below avid b'mailei shabsa. And he's not going to do malach on Erev Shabbos. And here the Gemara is going to derive from this that even shalol lishma is considered a mitzvah. And this is totally shalol lishma, because had it been any day of the week, he would have abstained from malacha. He got lucky, and he hit the bullseye here, and he fulfilled the minhag, but he didn't fulfill the minhag lishma. And yet, the Brisa establishes that niskar, he will be duly rewarded. And finally, the last category is shafal v'niskar. Wow, this is a strange dude. Delo avid kuli shabsa v'avid b'mailei shabsa. He's idle the whole week long, and on Erev Shabbos he does malacha. I mean, that's mamish against the din. You see one thing for this brisa that's all about heker. It's all about terminating. Again, in the ideal situation, you have to work and then terminate. If you're not working and you abstain from malacha, you'll get schar as what we call shalol lishma. But the real lishma would be someone who is very, very busy with his work. He's occupied, and then he does a ma'aseh hefsek, like we call Shabbos shvos, right? What does shvos mean? You work and then you stop malacha. And if you stop your malacha l'chvod Shabbos, then you fulfill that mitzvah of kavod Shabbos. Omar Rava. Hani
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
How can you have a shofar v'niskar? You have a posek.
You have a what?
Avod. How can you have shofar v'niskar?
Right, that part I heard.
If you all have a posek, sheshes yomin ta'avod. You have a specific mitzvah to work during the week. He does nothing.
Yeah, it says hoves havalacha, right? Kol. What is the language?
Yomin ta'avod v'yasisa kol malachta.
Right. What's the language of the Mishnah there? Right. But in any event, he gets schar for Erev Shabbos. About, maybe he'll get patched for not doing malacha the rest of the week. Look, he may be independently wealthy. In fact, Rava tells us about the lady folk in Mechoza. These women were what we call mifunachos. They didn't get involved in malacha. And He tells you here in the footnote to look in many different sugyas and chas where the Gemara tells us about the Bnei Mechuza. They were mefunakim, so they weren't involved in malacha. Is afal ga the haidelo avdin avida b'mali shamsa michum mifankusahu. So the only reason they're not doing malacha on Erev Shabbos is because they don't do malacha the whole week long. He says, nevertheless, the ha kol yoma nami lokovid. Nevertheless, afilu achi chafel v'nitzkar karinu. So the Mefarshim want to know exactly what is Rava adding to the Brisa, because he's literally word for word repeating what we saw in the Brisa. So the Tzlach answers the following. Masher Mosif Rava al divrei Brisa, Acher shekvar nisbayer b'Brisa, shemishein osam malach machmas atzlus, nechshav l'shafel v'nizkar. Hainu, we would have thought, he says, that Misha Machmas Atzluso lo osam malach b'Erev Shabbos. He's lazy the whole week long, and he's lazy on Erev Shabbos. He's called the shafel v'nizkar, because at least he could have done malach, and he didn't do malach. So the possibility of doing malacha, if you abstain from malacha, even though you would have abstained even if it wasn't Erev Shabbos, that gives you a certain element of schach. Aval nashim mechuza einon yecholos klal lasos malacha. They don't even have the capacity to do malacha. Shema'u nogos hein. In other words, in their very nature, they don't do malacha. Ubazeh ayinu omrim shafilu mitzvah shelo lishma ein lahen. This isn't even a mitzvah shelo lishma. In other words, we have three madregas here. You could have a mitzvah lishma. The whole week long, he's so dedicated to his work, but he stops on Erev Shabbos, Samach L'Mincha. Then you could have Shalol Lishma. He doesn't do any work during the week. He could have done malacha, but he continues in his idle state on Erev Shabbos. He'll get some schar as a Shalol Lishma. Then we have a level, which again, before Rava, we would consider even lower than Shalol Lishma, when he is in a state of physical idleness. You know, he's not working, but that's because he doesn't have it in his nature to work. B'chidesh Rava, she'af b'ofen zeh hein niskaros, that there's even a lower level of Shalol Lishma, when a person achieves and implements a minhag, but not actively, but simply because they have no choice. I mean, this is a great news that you can get schar for something that you're absolutely passive and you didn't have any choice to be otherwise, because your nature stops you from being otherwise. You know, it's like, imagine the following case. The Gemara talks about this, I think, in one of the Bavas, I don't remember which, that he's walking down the street and he carelessly dropped some coins. You know, he wasn't careful. And an ani, a poor person, picked up his coins. And the Gemara says he gets schar for the mitzvah of tzedakah. I mean, what kind of slishma is it? Had he been more careful, he wouldn't have dropped the coins. You know, he had no intention whatsoever of giving tzedakah. So that's what he says here, that Rava says that he gets schar for this. Now he quotes the Netziv, who says the following: Hosif Rava, sheba'ofen zeh, shelo nomar, shema shenemar li'olav yasok oda b'torah u'b'mitzvos afil shelo l'shma zeh rak im hu bi'atzmo Yavo lebasof lekaimon lishma. Ach, imli olam lo yavo lekaimon lishma. In other words, we anticipate and we hope that from shalol lishma he'll get to the level of lishma. But if he will never get to the level of lishma, eino bechlal zeh. V'lachein osa nashim Mi mechusa shali olam lo yavo lishbot mi malach be'erev Shabbos lishma. Einon, I mean before Rava, right? Einon bichlal, they're not included on the shafel v'niska. Lazeh amar Rava, she'enote. V'gamim ha'osek shalo lishma, li olam lo yavo lasos ha-mitzvah lishma, harehu niskar, upirish mitoch shalo lishma bo lishmahu, she'itachen shacherim ro'im also mekaymis ha-mitzvah, acherim ro'im also mekaymis ha-mitzvah shalo lishma, v'yavo lekaymis ha-mitzvah lishma. Again, I don't exactly understand what kind of schar he's talking about. In other words, the Netziv seems to be saying that we would advocate in favor of the shafel because others may imitate that shafel, unbeknown to them that the shafel is not doing it for the sake of mitzvah at all. The shafel, we assume, won't even come to lishma. But I'm not exactly sure why you get schar for that. Just because yitachen sheroim oso mekaymis ha-mitzvah v'yavo, they'll come to imitate him in lekaymis ha-mitzvah. And if that happens, then let it happen. But Rav is making a flat statement that shafel v'niskar. And what happens? Nobody sees the person or nobody imitates the person. You know, it would seem to me that to get schar for something that you didn't intend, but something good came out of it, that would depend upon the reality. Did something good come out of it? But if nobody saw you, I don't know why Rava, maybe the Netziv is saying, I don't think this is pshat in the Netziv, but that Rava means he'll get schar if somebody watches him and imitates him, or in this case. I don't think that's what Rav is saying, but logically, that's the conclusion one should derive from the Netziv, because the Netziv is assuming that mitoch shelo lishma bo lishma means that this, it's feasible to anticipate that you'll come to lishma. Here he says there's no possibility because of her very nature that she'll come to lishma, but others will watch her and they'll guess that she's involved in this mitzvah. I should also imitate her. Okay. Now, Rava has a discussion about mitoch shelo lishma bo lishma. Rava Rami Ksiv, it says in the Pasuk in Tehillim, ki gadol ad shamayim chazdecha, uksiv ki gadol me'al shamayim chazdecha. And Rava understands that this chesed is a reference to schar mitzvah. The first pasuk says, "Ki gadol ad shamayim chazdecha." That schar mitzvah is a chesed that reaches up to shamayim, but not beyond. A certain limitation in the chesed of schar mitzvah. But the second pasuk says, "Me'al shamayim chazdecha," that the schar mitzvah transcends shamayim. How do we understand that? Ketzad, how do we reconcile this? Kan be osim l'shma, but kan be osim shelo l'shma. So even though he's motivated shelo l'shma, nevertheless, ad hashamayim, he gets schar. And here I have a note. He says, "Ro'ui l'nisim b'shakadosh baruch hu yivatel v'yishana marochos shamayim ba'avuro." That in the second pasuk, which is referring to an osem mitzvah l'shma, me'al shamayim chazdecha, meaning that there will be miracles and changes in the order of nature, the natural order of the universe, for the sake of rewarding a lishma. Aval osa shelo lishma, Royahu l'schar, aval eino roy lios l'mala min hashamayim, meaning above the mazolos, above nature. That he doesn't deserve. The ein mishanin es marochos hashamayim ba'avuro. Now, I'm not sure exactly what he means by nisim. You know, we don't usually assume that schar mitzvah is nisim, miracles, supernatural events. I have a suspicion that what he means by nisim is what you call a nes nistar, meaning that within the providence of the Almighty, there will be an active participation of divine providence in order to protect him or to give him success. So that's the level of Me'ala Shamayim, and that's going to be Ha'osa Mitzvah L'Shma. And when it says Ad Shamayim, that's Ha'osa Shalol L'Shma. He's not going to be Zocher to any sort of change above Shamayim. He's within he's really relative, the orbit of Earth, so to speak, the down. I'm just going to take a minute here for a technicality. Sorry.
What time do you finish? 12. 12:31. Well, that's it. That's your extra stuff. What time do you finish the coda itself?
Doesn't seem to work.
11:30.
Okay.
Why can't you get that in there? Come back and I can go. I don't know where to take it.
I
offered to bring it down to the house.
That I found it. I found the right button. Okay. All right. So kan be osim lishma, and kan be osim shalol lishma. Ukir Rabbi Yehuda. The Omer Rabbi Yehuda Marav li olav yasok adam b'torah u'b'mitzvos. Afal pi shalol lishma, shavitov shalol lishma, ba lishma. Now, Tosfos and Rashi, even before Tosfos, all rise up with the following objection. Rava is quoted in Brachos on Daf Yud Zayin. Rava himself, who's the Bala Memra here, Osek b'Torah shalo lishma, noach lo shalo nivra. It would be preferable had he not been born. Here he says, Liolam yasok adam b'Torah shalo lishma. So Rashi, Dibra Maschil Ha'oser, offers the following answer. He says, there in Masechet Brachos, the case is Lomed B'chtei Lekanter Es Chavero Behalacha. He's not interested in halacha for the sake of implementing the Torah, fulfilling God's will, for the guf ha'maisa, for the mitzvah, but rather he uses the halacha and the Torah that he knows to undermine his friends, or a friend of his, a colleague of his. The alkain, for a person who's almanas lekanter, is noach lo shelo nivra. Kan, here in our Gemara, midubar Shalo Osa L'Shem Inyan Ra, there's nothing negative about his motivation. Ela Osa Sa Mitzvah, he does the mitzvah Kadeshi Chabduhu. He wants to do the mitzvah, but he wants to get also the kavod that he gets from a particular mitzvah. Is be ofen zeh when it's not almanas lekanter. Omar Rava Shah Osa Shalo L'Shma Mekabel Schach. So almanas yichabduhu is a neutral kind of kavana. It certainly is not l'shma, but nevertheless, it's not a negative kavana. Almanas l'kantiv means when you use the Torah, you use the mitzvos to somehow undermine other people. Like, Rabbi Yisrael Salanta used to say, you can take a sefer Torah, and if it's heavy enough, you can kill someone with a sefer Torah. So if he's using the Torah as a method of chopping down someone else, that's already a negative kavana. Here we're not going to say that Olam, the Olam Yasok b'Torah. No. On the contrary, Noach lo shlomim. So that's the approach of Rashi. Now we have Tosfos here, the second Tosfos, and he says that let's take the case of our brisa that we were studying. He doesn't do malacha on Erev Shabbos because he's lazy. Machmas atzlus. There is a mitzvah to be shoves mi malacha, but he's being shoves mi malacha because he's lazy. He doesn't want to go out and work, right? Dobie Gillis, if anyone remembers that, right? He just is interested in taking life easy. So that's a case of someone who will get schar because, once again, he's not likanter. He's not trying to undermine or cut down his fellow Jew. And here I wanted to add a comment of the Marsha. The Marsha writes that the two psukim that Rava quotes both end. Let's just see the two psukim. V'ad shchakim amitecha. Just 1 second. Yeah, word for word. The end of the psukim, both these psukim are identical. V'ad shchakim amitecha. And he says the following, the Marsha. In both psukim, the first half of the pasuk is directed to the issue, the question of getting schar in this world. And here we're going to differentiate between someone who does a mitzvah shalol lishma as opposed to someone who does a mitzvah lishma. Aval gabi aschar b'olam haba ein hevdel beinehem sheshneim yizku l'schar b'olam haba. V'al zeh simu apsukim v'ad shchakim amitecha. Now, I understand his diuk in the psukim because these two psukim, respectively, refer to shalol lishma or lishma, and yet they both end with the same three words of ad shchakim amitecha, which is a reference to olam haba. But why? I guess what he's saying is that the real schar in the case of shalol lishma is down in this world, but we do guarantee you schar in the next world. So it's only ad shamayim chazdecha because it's not going to be a supernatural nisim and it flows to protect such a person. He's motivated shalol lishma. But he is guaranteed, if not schar in this world, schar in the next world, even though he's shalol lishma. If he's doing a mitzvah or learning Torah lishma, then he gets a full schar in this world and in the next world, which means that it's me'al shamayim chazdecha, and there'll be nisim to protect him, etc. And that doesn't in any way detract from the schar that he'll get in olam haba. Toner Rabbanan, hametzapel l'schar ishto. A man expects to be supported by his wife. And then you have another case called Rechayim. Is Eno roe simon bracha liol. Now, what is the problem with these two categories? One, his wife is working and she brings in the bread. And number two, the case of Rechaim. Rechaim is a mill. So the Gemara explains the Bryce. L'schar ishto, what's the case of a person who's waiting for the check to come in from his wife's employment? Is mat kolsa. And Rechaya is like Garta. So he says the following: Matkolta means that she does a malacha b'zuya. What does she do in order to support the family? She's desperate. She takes a scale. She runs around in the marketplace, and she knows that in the market they very often need a scale. So she's going to rent it out to anyone who needs it. So this is called tircha meruba v'revach muat umizbaze ishto b'shvil revach muat. To run through the shuk and say, "Hey, who wants to rent a scale and get a couple of kopikas for that? It'd be very little money." That's a bizayon to the woman. And Rechaim is also a Torah Gadol v'Revach Mu'at. Aval Ovda umizabna, if she manufactures something, and the pasuk says in Eishes Chayil Sodin Osasav Atimkar Ishtabuche Mishtabach Beikra. That's when the pasuk praises the woman, and that is going to bring a siman yaf. There are two elements here, I think, of bizayon. One is because you're out in the public eye, and number two, you're selling something really cheap, and that involves a great deal of tircha, and it's in public. So that's not a good thing. It's very nice that you rely on your wife's parnasa, but she does not have a good job. On the contrary, her job brings her an element of humiliation. But if she's at home and she manufactures something, sudden vatimkar means she gets full price for it. She can actually bring in some significant funds for the family and without any element of humiliation. Now, I wonder what lessons are we meant to take from this Gemara? It sounds like the Bryce is just describing reality. This is not a good state if you're relying on your wife and she has to go out there and almost beg for money. She's selling a maznayim out, for rental purposes. What are the pearls of wisdom here that might inspire us? He quotes the following. Kosam Amar Shah, Shagamar Miva'eres, Sheyesh Simon Brach B'Dover Sha'asa Ishto Bi'atzma Umocheres B'Shuk. Okay, I don't know, is this some sort of metaphysical bracha? Again, obviously, it's a simon bracha in the sense that it's a good thing. She doesn't have to lower herself to some very menial work in public. She does this in private. And he writes, "V'yesh l'dayek mikach shekol davar shelo oso bi'atzma ein roy shetimkerenu b'shuk bi'atzma." Wow. The Marsha's assuming that she brings in money because she goes out to the shuk to sell her sweaters and her her curtains, whatever mattresses, whatever she makes. And since she made it herself, he says, therefore it's not called mat kolota. It's not something which embarrasses her. So he asks the following question: what happens if she's selling something in the shuk and it's not humiliating, but she didn't create it? The emphasis here if you take the Gemara literally, is on avda umizavna. Less than avda umizavna is not a siman bracha. Well, why is that so? Even in the absence of avda, if mizavna, she can get a good price for it. Let's say she's one of these wheeler dealers, so she buys and sells, and she makes a profit. So that's not a case of avda umizavna. Why should that be? I mean, what to make if she made it or she didn't make it? I mean, it's the same. The question is how much money she's hauling in. Is she running around hoping to scrape the bottom of the barrel, find some sort of buyer? Well, she's got good wares and good materials. What difference does it make whether she worked and produced it and manufactured it or not? He says that sadin asasava timkar means that she made the sadin bi'atzma and then she'll sell it in the shuk. Then it says in the pasuk v'chagar nasnola knani, chagar shalo asasa oso bi'atzma, eno misbazel u'mochro bi'atzma bashuk. Ela mevia leknani, klomel lesocher, shehuyim kerena b'shuk. So the Marsha is assuming that there's an element of bizayon to sell something in the shuk, and therefore she'll hire a knani who's going to be the middleman, and he'll go and sell it on her behalf, meaning they'll split the profits, whatever it might be. But now, if that be the case, if the Marsha is introducing another element to the equation, that for her to go out into the shuk is itself a bizayon, so how do we understand sadin asavatimkar? Vatimkar means that she herself is not selling it. So where does it happen after whether she manufactured it or she simply bought cheap and sold it at a profit? Yesh siman bracha davar sh'asa bi'atzma, kol davar shelo asa bi'atzma is ein roy shetim karenu b'shuk bi'atzma. That's a davar shelo asa bi'atzma. But for sadin asa savatimkar, Then Timkarena Bashuk. Timkarena Bashuk means it's not humiliating for her to sell something in the public marketplace if she herself created it. Not sure, there's some deep psychology. But he says, Sadin, but Chagar Nasal Knani, that's a case of an item which she bought and she's selling at a profit. Then it's a bizayin for her to sell it out in the shuk. And I'll read to you the Marsha. He says, Chagar shalo osasa oso bi'atzma, is she won't humiliate herself, or she should not humiliate herself. She should not sell it out in the shuk. In other words, people are proud to sell publicly that which they created. This is my work of art. This is my, what do they call? I'm trying to remember. Not sure if it's curtains or tapestry. Do you know what I'm referring to? There's, like you'll see it in the Catskill Mountains. If you go, they have these all over America, these stores where people, they do some great weaving job and different colors and different shapes, but I forgot the word for it. So that if she created it herself, is vatimkar, means she goes out there to sell it and she's proud. It's not humiliating. But to eke out a living for pishivkas by, renting out a scale, or for that matter, even a chagar, which maybe she could get, 25% profit. It's not something that she's proud of because she didn't manufacture it. And therefore, Laknani, she'll have a tagar, a socher, a mischar guy, he will sell it on her behalf out in the shuk. I have a suspicion that the Marsha is saying that Rava, or this Bryce, I should say, is not just describing the facts on the ground, but it's giving us a little bit of insight into perhaps tznius or halichos bas Yisrael, if you want to call it that. And he's advocating that you should, as a husband, you should try to avoid a situation where financially you're so dependent on your wife that she'll have to be mavaza herself. And that's not a siman bracha. Try to avoid that at all costs, if you pardon the pun. But if, on the other hand, you can encourage your wife to sell at a profit products that she manufactured herself with her own yodayim, and she goes out to the marketplace and sells it, that's within the purview of halichos bas Yisrael. And you could be proud of your wife that she created these, artistic products and she's selling them out in the market. She's getting a good profit for it. And there's no need to discourage her. But that's because she takes pride in her own work. If it's purely dollars and cents, then it would be a little bit of chisas hakavod, of a bizayon to some extent, for her to go out publicly and sell those items that she didn't create, and therefore chagar nasno laknan. And I just want to end with a Tosas Rid, and he writes, Hachiluk bein matkolta li avda umizmina hu shebe matkolta hainu shalokachas tzemer upishtan b'mishkal me'acherim. She buys the raw products. We're talking about wool or linen, and she pays, by weight. Amanas l'tavosam, and she's going to embroider them or weave them. The Einla Ella es revach hatvoya. She will make the profit of the actual weaving. The Avdo Mizavna Hainu Shekona Tsemer Upishtan Vitava Vaoreges Bekach Bgodim Limkar O Libnei Besa Ubazeyech Revach Yofa. It seems that he's learning he's learning this Gemara from perspective of Pashut business, business acumen. How much profit is she going to make? So if she buys a Tzemeru Pishtan, then she's not going to make much of a profit. She'll only make the profit of the increment between the value of raw Tzemeru Pishtan on the market and the value of Tvia. But then we have something called Avda Umizmana. And there she gets a good profit. So what's Avda Umizmana? Why does she get a better profit in that case? Again, if she takes Tzemer Pishtan from others, then she'll make a small profit. Margin of profit is small. But what's Avda Umizabna? Hainu Shekona Tzemer Upishtan. Oh, I see. He's saying that the profit is a function of whether she's actually being hired to do work. So, for example, Ruvain buys Semer Upishtan in a raw state, and he hires Leah to give him back a woven garment. And she'll only be paid for her work. And that's called matkolta. What's going to be the case of Avda Umizavna? That's where she's selling the final product on the open market, or she's doing it on behalf of her own family. So I have to admit, at the end of the day, whether I take the Marsha's approach or the Tosas Rid, we still are left sort of hanging in the balance as to what this Gemara is trying to teach us about a Simon Bracha. But one thing I know, that if she's violating the Halichos Bas Yisrael, she's humiliating herself, or alternatively, it's not sneistic what she has to do to make this money. That's not Roa Simon Bracha. Okay, then, so that's where we'll stop. Let me just make a note of where we got up to. We are up to Tanur Rabbanan Mistaker Bekonim. And Mistaker Bekonim is the third of the wide lines on the bottom of Nun Amid Beis. Wish you a great day. Thank you so much.
Good. Were you thinking of quilting?
Quilting, yeah, maybe that's the word, quilting. I remember reading books to my children about these beautiful quilts that they make, Yeah. But I saw it once with my own eyes. I don't remember where we were, somewhere in the Catskills, I think.
Yeah. The National Quilting Museum in Paducah, Kentucky. I came through that once.
Maybe I could look it up on Google. Maybe I have pictures of what they do. All right, Mitch, be well. Culture.